let's start with. So this is the app I've developed as a starting point for you to just see how React Native code looks. Last time I introduced a bit with slides what the concept is and all the discussion around it. So this time, and last time we had just the Hello World project running and helping people to install it. Now we're looking at a small React Native app. So this is not lo-fi or li-fi. This is a bit more hi-fi, let's say. So essentially what we have here, just as a quick point to demonstrate how React Native apps look, that they feel native and not too complex, that we still can do it in like an hour or so. So essentially what you have here on top, as you see, is the navigation bar. And then you have a list view, just like you would expect from a native app. If you drag down, you actually see, okay, this is really a list view. And if you click on one of these, the same happens for all of them currently, so I didn't want to make it too complicated. But you can press here, and then it opens a map view. So if you compare this with Cordova, for example, of PhoneGap, you may know it by this name, then you would get now a web view, which is really crappy on a phone. And you wouldn't want that. So here, this is really the native component. So on iOS, so you see it also supports a landscape mode, but I didn't intend that. So on iOS, it usually uses the Apple Maps application, but you can also make it use the Google Maps application, and it really feels native because it is native, right? And so essentially you see here, we are right here now, and this is just Apple Maps. You can zoom and pinch, or what you would expect from Apple Maps. So nothing special, except that it's not native. It's being controlled from JavaScript. So, but it is really the native code that's being run. And then I just made a simple example for a button. So if you want to now get direction, it actually opens Apple Maps and says, okay, you want to go here. You see this is the direction of the, sorry, let's go back here. So here. Okay, so you get the idea. Basically, you can also open the Maps application, get directions to the location, and then go back to the application. So this is what we're going to develop. I've pushed it on GitHub. If you haven't received the email, then you can get it from the GitHub link I provided there. Who has not received the email? So essentially then let's quickly show it. It's on React Native. They created organization for it. So this is the code for this. Oh, sorry, have to switch back to. Okay. So this is the full source code for this application is available here. It's a very small application. It builds on the latest React Native, which is version 0.37. And essentially you can see the files here. And if you want to know how this was built, you can also look in the commits. And there actually, so essentially I just did React Native init in the project name, just like you saw before. It will bootstrap the project for you. And then, because you have these Android.js and iOS.js files, the first thing I did, I got rid of them, because this app has the exact same code for both platforms. There's no specific code involved. And then, let's go back. And then I added the React Native Maps package, which provides the maps. In future versions, it will be built into React Native because they're adopting this package, which is maintained by Airbnb. They're adopting it to be the official React Native apps and maps package. And what's more, for the navigation, because they still have some kind of construction site for this, I'm using React Native Router Flux, which is really easy to use, supports Redux if you want to, and later on, once they really settled on how the navigation should be done best, it's not a lot of code or knowledge you have to throw away. It's just some easy thing to do, and as you saw, it looks almost native. And So what else? So I added some custom code that essentially replaces the Hello World app with what you've just seen. Updated some Xcode project settings, like added the application icon and so on, and that's it. So there are several options, like who has programmed with React Native before? Just like 4 people here. I think for most it would be most interesting if I just replicate how you actually build a first application. And for those that have already done this, you can just check out the code and just play around with it, extend it a bit, things like that. So, but I will focus here now on replicating this application with you here today. Is that sounds cool, or? Yeah? All right. So let's get started recording. I actually forgot. So first I have to find WebStorm. So of course you need some kind of IDE. Who has already, or who has not installed an IDE for working with React Native? You all have? All right. So for you, maybe WebStorm would be a recommendation, or Atom. So Atom is this GitHub editor that's free, and WebStorm is from JetBrains, which I'm using. The latest version that will come out, this is the release candidate of the next version, will have React Native support. The nice thing about WebStorm is it actually shows you some of the errors already while you're typing, or you can jump to code references back and forth. This is what I really like about WebStorm, and you don't have to set up anything, it just works if you install it. And the same is for React Native. You heard all about the stage 0 stuff that may have scared you a bit. If you're just relying on ES6, so this is the standard that's actually now official. If you don't need any experimental features that are not yet standardized, React Native just ships with all of it. It's with Bubble built in. You can actually use ES6 in your code. You can also use JSX like in React, and you don't have to do anything for that. You can use import statements like they are standardized in ES6 and export the modules, all of this. You don't have to set anything up, you just do React Native init, the project name, and you're done. So just to put this a bit in perspective, you don't need any special features, it's really easy. But if you do, of course, you run into issues like Wolfram has. So how does a React Native project look like? Just first have a look at how it looks when it's done. So essentially when you run React Native init, you end up with a project folder like this. Can you all read this here, or is it too small? Is it too small? No. Okay. All right. So essentially on the left side you see all the files. You end up with a package JSON. If you've programmed Node.js, then you know what this is. So essentially it's the dependencies of your project. Here it depends on React. These are all defaults except for the 2 ones that I've added here, the React Native maps and the router flux. And essentially it's, if you do React Native init, it grabs the latest React Native, which in this case, because I've done this today, is 0.37. It actually now, which is quite new, already includes Jest as a unit testing framework, and all the presets for Bubble and so on. So this is kind of nice. You end up with this except for these 2 lines if you do React Native init. So let's just maybe do this in the meanwhile. So,
one quick question.
Yeah.
How often do you recommend to update React Native? So is there a version live which is kind of stable, or do you usually just use the master?
Well, so they're on a 2 weeks release cycle, as you've heard. So what I would recommend is to at least every month or so try to get to the latest version, because most of the packages actually reference we're just supporting the latest thing. If you run into any issues, you're not supported if you use any old versions. Upgrading for me wasn't such a pain like Wolfram has reported. So actually for me it's not as much as an issue. So I would recommend to at least say one each month or every second month to just try to get to the latest packages and not stick with the version you've begun with. Okay, so essentially you do React Native init and your project name. So let's call it live. And then what we'll do, before you have to of course install React Native CLI, but you probably all have based on your feedback. So now it's connecting to the internet and fetches all what you need for this project, bootstraps it. May take a while, so we can do this in the background and essentially have a look what else is in a project. So essentially here is the index iOS.js. This is the file that's specific to iPhone. So I've reduced it to just this line. It essentially says just pick the code from app.js. And the same is for Android. So it says it's the exact same code, even in these two files, and just says reference app.js, and then you're done. So the rest is all the same for both platforms, and this is really nice. So if you're not doing any special stunts that are not supported yet, there's no component for it, then you don't actually need to do two code bases or maintain two separate files. Of course, if you want to have a special component like that's only available on iOS, like the picker, then you have to either make two files like Wolfram did, or what you can also do in your code, you can do an if platform iOS, something like this, and it will just pick the version that's right for you. Okay, so let's quickly browse the resulting code while it's installing. So essentially, all the code starts with the app.js, and let's start in the beginning. You import React and the component, React components, of course. Who has not programmed with React before? One? All right, two. Okay, the rest knows React. That's really nice. So essentially, React means this is the web library. It's not we are not using the web parts, but it's the same as the React library for browsers. And the only thing that's different here are these components. So we are importing app registry, which basically says to React Native which component is the app. And then there's the style sheet component, or it's not a component, actually it's a style sheet object, and there you can create style sheets similar to CSS. There you have a text component where you can just write text. View is actually this rectangular area. For example, let's assume this will be a view. So it's just some rectangular area like a div in HTML that contains elements. And then status bar in this case is just I used for, let's see if I have the simulator running. I used for making this status bar white because it looks bad if the default is black. All right, so this is all the dependencies we have on React and React Native. And then I added React Native router Flux, which essentially does this blue thing here on top. I just changed the colors, but if you click here, this is the iOS simulator. Let's see if it actually works. Probably it's not connected. So essentially what you saw in the app, this is the React Native router Flux, the navigation between the two screens and the back button. Why is it? Okay, it's working, it's just slow. All right, and what else? So I'm including two files, and ES6, if you don't know, each file is a module. So you import from the module map and the module list. And then you have the app component. App component means all your whole UI for the app is inside this component. And it's like the HTML DOM, it's hierarchical. So the app component can contain subcomponents, and these can contain subcomponents, and so on. So essentially, as you see here, it's just a render function, which means to display something on the screen. And here, it's this XML style, this HTML style XML, which instead of HTML tags uses the native components, view instead of div, for example, or status bar. Here I'm making the status bar white. If you just remove this, then you will see it will just get black. Okay, then here on the top level on the app component, I'm using the router, which is from React Native Router Flux, which is responsible for the navigation between screens. And the screens are called scenes. So I have the root scene, which is just wrapping the other scenes. And then I have, like here, let's see, the first one is usually the initial scene, except if you've done so, then this is the initial scene. So I have actually two scenes in here, and one is called, let's see, this is the map scene, and the other one is a list scene. And I think I don't need to explain, this is the map scene, and the other one is the list. And here I'm changing just the back button image because it's usually defaults to the blue one that iOS navigation components usually have. And
sorry, one question. If you want to place buttons on the map, is it possible?
On the navigation?
On the map.
On the map. Yes. So as you see, here is a button.
Okay.
So this was an example to show this. And so here we're just saying, okay, scene map. Okay, Siri, not scene. Hello, Siri. Okay. Okay, so essentially I'm just saying the back button image should be a white arrow instead of blue arrow, and here I'm just saying the title should be from this string here. So I'm just picking this. This is the style actually, so this means it's a white text, a certain text style. Okay, and then I'm saying, okay, the component is map or list, and then the title, the meetup location. For example, here you see meetup location. This is because of this line here, right? So far, so good? Is everyone following, or is it too slow, too fast? Yeah?
This seems kind of iOS specific. Like, is there like a back chevron on the Android version too then?
Sorry?
It seems kind of iOS specific. Is there like a back chevron on the Android version too then?
Yeah, so on Android, I've actually not run the simulator because it's really slow, the Android simulator, and I couldn't get the Android phone, even if I have a connector, to show on the screen. But it looks exactly the same, the application on Android. So it looks like this. Okay. If you want to have it look differently, of course you can, but it works the same. It's not specific to iOS.
Yeah, but it doesn't seem like most Android applications have like a back chevron like that.
Yeah, for this you could use the Android draw layout component, which there is, and then you could just have some burger menu and you slide in your menus and how you do it in Android. I'm actually not, I have an iPhone. I don't know how exactly it should look native, but you could make it look native, of course.
Yeah, okay.
Another question?
Yeah. The routing library that you're using, is that something like the recommended library to use, or?
There are different ones. There's the built-in navigator, I think it's called, and there's Navigator iOS, because like only a couple of months ago there was only iOS version of React Native. So they had a Navigator iOS, which was actually the native Navigator. And then they replaced it by something else, and now there's Navigation Experimental, it's called, which is experimental, and I would recommend to wait a bit until they've settled off what they really want to do. And this React Native Router Flux just builds on top of Navigation Experimental, but it doesn't expose you to all the complexity of it. You don't need to invest in how exactly does this work before you even know if it's going to be in the end version like this. So for me it's kind of a let's say polyfill or a placeholder where I just say I don't have to worry about which one to pick. This is good for me right now, and once the navigation is more stable, or they've decided how it should best be done, I can just replace these, as you see, very simple lines. This is not something where you invest a lot of time in learning or writing it. Yeah. So my recommendation, my personal recommendation would be to use this. What I've also seen is that, for example, the company that builds this website construction kit called Wix, I don't know if you know it. They're also investing, they have like 200 web developers, they said in a talk about React Native, and they decided to use React Native to actually build the smartphone versions of their app. And they are contributing React Native components when there doesn't exist something. They're just developing it by their team and they're contributing it back to React Native. And they're actually developing a navigation component that builds on top of the native iOS and Android versions, but it's not done yet. So I will follow this. Once it gets mature, then I will switch probably, but right now I would recommend to just use this gap filler, right? And yeah, as you see, this is really just a few lines of code, like 10 lines of code. And it just says, okay, make the status bar white. We have two scenes. We want to have a white back button and we want to have a white text. And also there will be, like on the bottom, the styles, which then says, okay, the navigation bar background should be blue. If you just want the defaults, you don't need all of this, but it will then just be like the gray, light gray background navigation bar. Okay, so this is how you do styling, which I've showed last time. Essentially, it's just a JSON object where you say, okay, I want to, for example, flex1 means the container should fill all the area it's in. Items should be aligned center, the background color should be this. And here for the navigation bar, just setting the background color, you can see here blue. And for the text, it should be white and should be bold. But except for that, everything should be default, right? And this is actually then just, okay, there I compiled the style sheet, which will just be compiled to a number. So it's a bit lighter and a bit quicker to display. And then you just say, well, the app component is actually now registered to React Native. This is where the app starts. And this is the whole code, right, for the main application. Of course, we have to go then into the map component and the list component where the rest of the code is. So you see here, this is the app.js, and then you have the list and the map.js. You're free to do whatever you like, but I just made per scene one file. What else? As you see, the Babel RC is being created for you. There's just some defaults. If you don't need anything special, everything works out of the box. Flow is already in. If you know Flow, it's a bit similar to TypeScript, so you can actually annotate which types your functions are using. It does some checking for you if there are some logical errors in your code, like based on types, for example. You get the git ignore, you get the watchman config, which is nothing, and you get the package JSON, and I just removed the content of this by what's in the app.js. So this is all there is. Not really. What's more is the iOS folder and the Android folder. The assets folder actually I created. This is just the back button here. So, so you can ignore this safely. And there's now new since 1 or 2 versions, the tests folder where you actually see how you could test your React Native code. But this is still, I think, a bit experimental. So over the next month, I think this will stabilize more. So what's the iOS and the Android folder? Actually, let's maybe start with the iOS because I'm developing on iOS usually. So there's your Xcode project. So in there is a real Xcode project. This is Objective-C or whatever you want to have in there, Swift or Objective-C. You can actually open it in Xcode, which I've probably done. So here it is. And you can even run it from within Xcode. So for example, for putting it on a device, I just set the target to the connected phone and it's just being copied over. You just open it and you run it. There's not a lot to do for running it on the device. Of course, as you know, as an iOS developer, you have to set a profile, you have to have a MacBook, you have to register as an Apple developer, things like this you won't get around with. But essentially, there's not a lot you need to do manually. It's just set up for you. All right, so the other thing is the Android folder, which you can guess is an Android Studio project where you can just write your Java code. For example, in a client case, I'm developing Objective-C components and Java components for iOS and for Android respectively, and exposing it as a component to React Native. So like the built-in components, you then just don't have to worry about the native side. Somebody like me has written a complex native component for both platforms, and then the other ones that are just developing React Native can just build or use this component. They don't have to be native developers. But in this case, for example, it's like a document scanner where you just take a picture of a photo and you want to have it corrected. This you usually will do in a native project. Or you just get from NPM, from the Node package manager, you can just find a lot of ready-made packages that are not in React Native yet, or are too specific to ever be in there by default. Okay, so far so good. The native projects we can close, and actually the init is already done. So what you have to do then is React Native link. Right now we don't have to do it, but let's first start with the one I was missing. npm install, and I save what I want to install to the project, React Native maps and React Native router flux. And now from npm it will get these two packages, download them and install them. Afterwards you have to run React Native link, which will set up your Xcode and your Android Studio project to actually include or do all the things you normally need to do manually to add the dependencies there. Alright, so there's not much more to talk about except for looking at the list and the map components, but if you have any questions, I mean, like just for the very basics, now would be a good point to ask.
So
all right.
you get here by default now.
Sorry?
So you get here by default now.
I get here by default?
I got here .log now from my generator. When I generated the new app, I got yarn.log.
Yarn.log?
Yeah.
Okay.
So you can also use yarn by default.
Could be. I haven't. Yeah, I haven't, but probably you have installed a new version of the command line tools. I didn't install them for a long time now, like half a year or longer. All right, so if there's anything you're stuck with, then just ask. If not, then I'll just go on and just explain how the two screens work. For example, here's the list screen. Let's for the moment close what's installing here. So this is the list module which includes only the list, or exposes only the list component. So if you have done ES6 before, you know you need to export everything you want to see from outside. It's not like in Java where you have classes, or in C++ where you use classes for encapsulation, but you just export the things you want to be public, and by default they're all local to the module, not visible from outside. And if you write defaults, then this is actually, if you just import and then write the name, you just get this single default, but you can expose many components or many, let's say, variables or functions, but this one was labeled as a default. And then this is a React component. I just called it list, and it extends, of course, component, which is from the React library. And there you have a constructor in this case, which in most cases you don't need. Let's just close it for the moment. Or what's maybe confusing, just to get to the core. So every React component has this render function, and there we have a view which has a certain style applied to it. That means what size it is, what color is it, and stuff like this. And it contains a list view, which essentially is this row-based list of, in this case, text. Could be anything. And you can, by default, you can also already drag it and stuff like this. And okay, there I say it should be the whole width of the screen or the whole size of the screen, and the data comes from where? From this .state.data source, and each row is being rendered by this function, and each separation, like this light gray line between the rows, is rendered by this function here. And that's the whole code except for some magic. Let's move this out of the way. So these are the styles that are being applied. Nothing really interesting. Background color, like the margin, how where it should start, how it should be aligned, text size, weight, alignment, margin, color, background color. Yeah, just simple stuff like this, just to give you an idea what you need to write. You can download all of this code, and then of course you have to look into how these, for example, the render row function here is using a touchable highlight, which is how formerly they would have called a button. Now in 0.37, which is out since like 1 or 2 weeks, they actually have a button component, which was missing for a long time. But before that, you always had to use touchable highlight, which means if you press on it, it just lights up a bit, visual effect, or touchable opacity, which means if you touch this area, just a rectangular area, then it will get a bit not opaque, but it's a bit transparent. So if you press on it, it just fades away a bit. Like you can see. Let's see. While it's installing, of course, the simulator is a bit slow. So if you press here, then you see this is touchable opacity. It gets translucent until I release the button. So let's see. From the performance, I can see it's already done. That's nice. Okay, so we've installed, now just to pick up this, so we've installed React Native Maps and React Native Router Flux, and now we need to do React Native Link, which prepares the native projects to use the Maps component. And actually, I've probably done this in the wrong folder, I think. Let's see. Yeah, so my bad. So let's do this again. Okay, so in the meanwhile I can continue explaining. So essentially this was, so this is the function that renders the row with some button. So touchable highlight is this rectangular area that you can press on, and inside this area I'm putting some text as a title and some text as a description in a different style, which is, as you can, installing and running the simulator at the same time is not a good idea, but I could switch simply. Okay, so essentially you have these two text components here on the top, like the title in black and the other one in gray. So these are the two text components. Outside are some views, and the whole, for example, see the cable is long enough. This would be the touchable highlight area, which contains the text components.
The whole row? Or?
The whole row, yeah. So QuickTime Player crashed because I disconnected my laptop. So let's start this thing again. All right, let's close this here. Okay, back to where we were, I hope. Essentially, so this is the renders one row, and as you see, one row is one big button which contains a view, which contains another view, which contains two text elements, which we just saw. And if you press on a row, then this function is being called, and in my case, I've just made it very dumb. It will just always go to the same map screen. It's not custom yet or customized yet. You can do this, but just for having a quick, simple example for you to show, this is the function being called if you press on one of these rows with the row ID, so you can actually identify which element of the list has been clicked on. If you look in the constructor, this is a bit more complicated, not really the beginner issue, but well, I thought if I just do hello world, you will fall asleep. So here's the list view, you set the data source. Then maybe if you haven't done React, we need to talk about what state is. So each component is usually stateless, so it doesn't remember anything. You pass some props to it, some properties, which define how what state it is in. For example, like, is the button pressed or is it not pressed? You could pass as a property. If you want to maintain some state within the component, you do it in this state variable. And there, for example, I provide the data for the list, like the title of the meetup, like which city and which date, and the description. And these are being rendered then in the list view. So if any of these that are in the state variable change, the component will be re-rendered. If you're changing other variables inside this component, the component will not notice, it will not re-render. So anything you change in state will trigger the component to re-render. So for example, if you are changing this here, write something different, immediately the component will be re-rendered. Then here I'm just saying, okay, this is the array for the first list element. It should call actions map, which is how actions is an object from the React Native router Flux, and there you say where it should go to. So essentially this is saying go to the map screen. And I've just done the same for all of the rows to keep it simple. And then, of course, if you've programmed with JavaScript, you will notice sometimes you will know about binding functions to an object, which is not done by default. If you don't know already what this is, I think it will more just confuse you if I just rush through it. But you will run into this issue if you program with JavaScript. And that's about what there is. This is rendering the separator, like this gray line. So it just says I'm a rectangular area and I have a background color of, like here you see it's either light gray or has this color, depending on if the list element is pressed or not. And this renders this gray line here, right?
You know that it's not rendered at the moment?
Sorry?
It's not rendered at the moment. You
Here.
have to uncomment line 63.
63.
For you it's 15 after.
59.
Yeah, this one.
Yeah. You mean it's not highlighting?
Yeah.
Yeah, right. But it's rendered here as not being highlighted, right?
Yeah, but is this from your code? Ah, no, this is just setting the adjacent row highlighted. Oh.
Okay. So let's see if so the installing has finished. So now we can do what I intended to do, React Native link. So this will now link the React Native maps and the React Native router Flux packages to the native projects. And in the meanwhile, we can have a look at the map component.
Can I ask something about the list real quick?
Sorry?
Can I ask something about the list real quick?
Sure.
The data source. Why didn't they make it so you need this data source and you just can't pass in, know, like an array of objects or something? Is it because that row has changed things that they want you to be able to?
Well, essentially what you're doing here is an array of JSON objects. This is what you pass in. Why do we have this, call this function? I cannot answer. This is how they want you to do it. There's probably so yeah.
And to update it, is there's some function on the data source that's like add row or something?
Yeah, I think we can have a look at the.
Yeah, I guess I could just take that.
So, Listview. So essentially, maybe that's a good thing to show. Of course, you will have to go to this page here, React Native. Getting started will get you started, how you install it, and here you have, like Wolfram has already shown, all the topics that you want to cover. Like here are the basic concepts and some guides how you do certain things, and here are some iOS specific guides, Android specific guides. Here's all about the components. For example, the Listview you could have a look into, and APIs are something that's not a component, nothing is being rendered on the screen, but is actually just some functions, for example the clipboard, or like Wolfram said, the geolocation module. So if you have any specific questions, for example how to use the Listview, we can have a look here. And this is just to get you started, not to go into depth how all of this works. So here is all the explanation about how you do it and why you do it, what options you have. On change visible rows function called when the set of the visible rows changes. All these details are available here. And I think this is just to provide you some starter point where you have to look if you have questions like this.
Sorry?
Yeah?
Another question. So can you add, for example, title, description, and city, and so on, and how to identify these objects?
Essentially, you can put anything in here. This is just a JSON object. I just invented that it's title and description. And how you do this is actually in the render row function here. I'm accessing the row data object. And there you just...
Row data on description.
And there you have the full access to this JSON object.
Okay.
So the linking is finished. So now we're doing this in parallel if you're getting confused. So I'm down here, I'm just replicating what I did above. And while I'm showing you around the code, we are just replicating this project. So we have already initialized the project, we have installed the dependencies, we have linked the dependencies. Now we could, for example, try to run it, React Native run iOS. Let's see if that will work. This will take a while. If you're doing this the first time, it will have to compile all the native projects. In this case, it's the iOS Xcode project. So this is the map module, which contains the map component. And there, for example, I've just hard-coded for this tutorial the latitude and the longitude of this point in space here. And essentially what's being rendered is again a view, like this rectangular area which contains a map view, which is just the map, sets the initial region, like the part of the map that's being shown, and puts the pin at this location. And the touchable opacity is actually this blue button on the bottom. This one here. So if you press on it, on press is being called, and in this case I'm using the linking module of React Native, and there you can specify, for example, an URL that should be opened. And if you're opening this URL, then actually it will open the native maps application, which is getting you to the directions that you saw before. And there, of course, you put the text here, take me to the meetup, and to provide the style. Actually here I set, for example, the border radius to have round corners, and this is then how the button looks like, right? And if I press here, this linking function is being called. Okay, so this is essentially what I can show you around in the code. The rest I think you can just explore. Did you have problems downloading it for those that have tried?
I have problems installing it.
Yeah? Okay, we can have a look shortly. So maybe you have some questions right now, or you have anything specific you want to learn about React Native, anything that's not clear to you, because I don't know what your background is. I just know you haven't programmed probably with React Native before, except for some like 5 people. But if you have iOS background, Android background, web background, this is all different. So let's, yeah.
If you have an already running app, how much time do you need to compile it again if you add some features?
This
because now you need a lot of time to compile all the dependencies.
Yes, that's a very good point. If you've done this once, you don't need to do this again. So compiling, if you really need to compile the app, just takes a few seconds, let's say 30 seconds to a minute. But if you're just changing something, for example, in the layout here, you want to make this area red, you just press save and it takes like 1 second and it's being updated. It doesn't even restart the app. I will show this once the installing has finished, because if I show this now, then of course it will be very slow. But this is just to show you step by step how you get through this, because a lot of people who haven't started with this yet will have problems one step or the other, and then if I skip too many steps, then they will just don't know how to go on. So this is just to get up and running this meetup group where a lot of people don't have experience with it. So maybe this is a good point. Any problems so far to get to run the demo project I put on GitHub? You said you couldn't run it?
I think it's something related to React Native maps.
Yeah?
Something, I don't know.
Did you
okay.
do this? Did you do npm install after you downloaded it? Yes? Did you do React Native link, just to be sure? Okay.
But okay.
Are you doing this on iOS? In the simulator or on Android? iOS. Then it should work. I can have a look later. All right. So, yeah, this is essentially the project I would like to show you. As you see, most of the time when you start a project, you're just waiting for installing all these dependencies. But once this is done, which I can probably just do right now, because the project, like it is now, is in the state it will be when this finishes, except for the code that I've added. Let's just get this running. I just close all the things that we don't need. Of course, I'm also now running the screen grabber, which records the video from my screen, which also takes some time. Okay, so this is WebStorm, which this is the latest version, which actually has support for React Native. So for me, it's just pressing play, but for you, it would be React-native space run -iOS started. This is the same thing. And then when you start up the project, it will take about a minute or so to launch the simulator, to load the packager, which is actually transmitting the JavaScript code to the compiled project. But once this is done and the packager is running, if you change something just in your JavaScript code, you don't need to recompile your app. It's just being transmitted over the network. If it's on the simulator, of course, it's localhost. Or if it's your phone, it will just transmit the difference between the JavaScript code, the JavaScript bundle, just all your JavaScript in one file, will transmit it to the simulator and just replace the code while the app is running. And this makes for very fast iteration cycles, like Wolfram said. If you want to change something in the layout, just to show the client, well, the button has to be a bit more on top, has a different color, some different layout. You just change it immediately, press save and save, and it's there. You can immediately see the results. But of course, like right now, the first time you start it, it just takes a while, but then you leave it running for the whole day. So it just starts the simulator now. What time is it? Okay. As you see here, it's building the Xcode project. It's launching the iOS simulator. I'm using Xcode 8 right now. I don't know if somebody has problems. It could be that you don't have Xcode 8, because I'm probably up.
Okay. I think I found already a GitHub issue related to that.
Okay. Good.
Just go on, no worries.
Yeah? Yeah, I have time until this loading has finished. So, yeah, essentially, this is the project I wanted to show to you. So we explored all the code right now. We have now all the steps how to install and how to start it. And once this is finished, we can actually show you how you quickly can change some things of the layout. So 80% of the code is being transmitted. Okay, so now the project is running. For those that are still here, took a bit longer than we thought. So this is the Welcome React Native project, and now I'm just transforming it to include the rest of the demo application. So we've already included the React Native Maps package and the React Native Router Flux package, and what I noticed is that in the project that's on GitHub, this is depending on Xcode 8 if you're using the MacBook, and that's probably why it's not working on some of your machines, because you're still on Xcode 7. Another issue is if you're running this on Linux or for Android, if you want to use Google Maps, you have to register for Google Maps API key. Essentially, if you Google it, you go to the Google page and you have to register and so on, and you get a short string which you put in your application, and then you can display Google Maps on Android. For iOS, you don't have to do this, or you don't need to do this, and essentially for iOS, if you want to run it on the device, you have to install a profile and have an Apple developer account. But if you're not an Apple developer, you can just run it on the simulator like I do, which is actually not a bad choice compared to Android. I would recommend, if you have a MacBook, use the iOS simulator. It's really a lot faster, and it's really, really convenient to use. Yeah, now it works. Okay. I just saw it. Okay. So now we're talking. Okay, so this is the developer menu, which you can open with a shortcut. I usually do it with Command-Control-Z on Mac, but I think you can do it with Command-D as well. So here you can restart the application. We'll just restart the whole application. You can enable to debug it remotely, which will open Chrome, for example, and inside the developer tools, like a website, you see in the console all the logs. You can debug your code there. You can enable live reload. Live reload means the application will restart once you see changes in your code. And then enable hot reloading, which I will do now, will actually detect changes in your code, but it will not restart the application doing that, but it will just replace the code and apply it there. Let's try this. So as you see, it takes a while to enable it, but once it's running, it's really quick. So I ordered a new Mac that's going to be a lot faster. So, okay, so now it has started. So if you change something here, as I've shown last time, then it's going to change immediately. You don't need to compile anything, right? So now I'm just adding the files that are in the different project. Let's, for example, do step 1, app.js. I just copy paste all the code in the iOS.js, put it there, and actually the Android code is exactly the same right now, so I don't need to copy this, I can just delete it. And the only thing I have to change here is to put here export have to remove the default here. Export app from, and there you go, app. And this is the code you need in the Android.js and in the iOS.js. And if everything works, it should still look the same. But we removed all the platform-specific code, right? And now we can start just working on the app.js. So essentially I can just now remove all what we don't need. Let's say, for example, the text here. And actually include the router code. So to make this a bit quicker, I just copy paste some code from the other project. Let's open it, take some code here. I also take the styles because I've customized them. And of course right now it won't work because we have not included the map and the list component, but we could simply mock up some of these components. So if you haven't seen this, this is this arrow function notation in ES6. So essentially I'm making a function that's called map, and in React or in React Native as well, you can just write simple components like this. They don't have a state, but they're very simple to write this way. It's, for example, just put a text component here, hello, or let's call it map so we know what it is. Let's do the same thing for the list. And let's see what happens. Probably won't work, but let's see. So it's looking now for the image that we haven't included yet in the project. So let's just remove it. The navigation bar style we don't need. We don't need the white back button image. And what else we need to remove? status bar we haven't included here. But now it's rendering, right? So we have now the default navigation bar except for the text color, which we will just remove. Okay, so now this is the basic framework. So you have the navigation bar on top, you have default styles, no fancy things, and what's now being rendered and why you don't see the text is because it's being rendered below the navigation bar. So you would either need to have a margin or just center it in the page. Let's, for example, say we wrap it with a view. Let's see where it is. Sometimes you need to restart if you're changing something with the navigation. Oh, this is actually the map. So probably now it's there. So there you see, this is the list component being rendered on this page. Of course, we can't now navigate between these because we haven't registered any actions. But once we register an action, for example, on, let's say here, text on press, let's call a function.
I think it looks like you're overlapping the list and the map.
I don't think so. Just a second, I need to close this bracket because it had noticed that I haven't finished this code.
You don't actually do brackets.
Right. Doesn't hurt either. So, okay, let's see if it works.
Where is map coming from? Actions.map. It's like the name from.
Like I've explained before, but let's just recap it. Here, React Native Router Flux has the router component, which just wraps all the pages, has scenes, and it has this actions object. And this actions object just inserts magically some functions named like the route of your
like
scene.
The key from the router, right?
This is the key from the router here.
Okay.
So you just call map or list here.
Yeah.
So let's try if I click on this. Actually it works. Looks pretty crappy, I agree. But this is how the basic is. So I see it's really not a lot to do. And we already have the navigation. Of course now we need to fill in some content. We need to fill in the maps. We need to fill in the list view. And if you want, what would you prefer, maps or list? Or any other questions or directions you want to see? Let me just start with the list view because it's probably easier. So like we've seen before, this was the code from the list view. All I need to do is to include the list view here, which we can do in the other project now. So since I'm doing all of this in one file, I don't need to create another file or switch between files. It's just to replicate the steps. Of course, this will not look as perfect as the example I've put on the GitHub repository, but this should really show you there's no step missing, right? So essentially all I need to take is this list view here, put it in the render function. Now I have to probably make it as a class. Stateless function isn't enough if you want.
You can pass pros.
Yeah?
You can first argument is pros.
I know, but I need a state in the component. So. So instead of making this a stateless function, I will just put in a class with a render function. If you're using JSX spanning several lines, you have to put these rounded brackets here, so it's actually being recognized. So if everything works, it should still look the same. 33. So probably this should be like this. Okay, so it's still being rendered. Now it's a class. We can put in some state here. Instead of the text, let's just put the list view here. Of course, we now need to define the data source and the render functions for the row and the render separator. So that it doesn't get too boring, I just copy this and essentially I've added the constructor which is being called when the component is being created. Then the function that is being called when a row is pressed. The function that will render the row based on the array with the data, and the render separator. Let's see if I've missed anything. Yeah, I have this hash function which is not being used actually, I think, but we have to put it there so I don't need to adapt the code. Did I miss anything? Yeah, I would need to adapt the styles. Let's see if it works. Touchable highlight. So I haven't included the button component touchable highlight. And there you go. You already see the styles are not fixed yet, but it's already up and running in a couple of minutes. So installing and bootstrapping the whole project took a lot longer than adding the navigation bar, navigation between the two pages, and this list view component. Now we just have to add the styling for the navigation bar and for this. And actually the navigation is already working if I click on it, which should demonstrate you, it really looks crappy, I know, but it's so fast how you can develop. You should just try to do this on iOS or Android in an hour or so.
You have to write a lot of code now.
Yeah. And even these iterations, like for example, I change something, I press save, I reload it. This is so quick. This saves you so much time. And of course, now while you're waiting and so on, it's not so easy to do for me, but as you see, the project I've prepared looks really native, and as you saw right now, there's nothing magic going on behind. I just copy-pasted some small snippets of code, but the rest you all saw live. So installing took like half an hour or so to let the commands run, download the code, compile the project for the first time. But once you're up and running, the iteration is really quick. So we didn't restart the app. If you haven't noticed, we didn't compile anything. In a lot of cases, the styles are just updated. As you see here, we haven't adapted the status bar to be black in this case. I can remove this here. Where is it? Here. Let's just take out the styling code for the status bar and see it's being hot reloaded. Didn't even change the view, right? And this is really what React Native is about. It's so much faster once you have all this installed, which made you think like, whoa, when is this going to be to start, or is it even going to start? But once we are up and running, this is so quick. You can write, if you've done this before, if you've bootstrapped your project, you can write like in an hour. So a project like the GUI that Wolfram has presented. Huh? If you know what you want to do, if you have all the design clear, you can write this in an hour. Okay, let's try to add the map component as a final step. I think we're already around 10 p.m. The talk took a bit longer in the installing. So what I would like to ask, if somebody's interested, this is like just to get you to know how React Native looks in practice, what steps you have to take, that you don't have any stumbling blocks, that you know how exactly it looks like if you're interested in learning this. Who would be interested in doing a project together, like a tutorial workshop project like this, developing a small app together, get to know how to integrate, for example, Redux, server requests, push notifications, all of this stuff.